Welcome to the Pacific Research Institute's Next Round podcast. I'm Rowena Ichon, Senior Vice President, and with me is Tim Anaya, Senior Director of Communications. So, Tim, the big news this morning, and it's January 25th, Newsom just announced that he's lifting the statewide stay-at-home order, which just makes me wonder, Tim, when he instituted these statewide orders, it was back in early December, and at least in LA County, cases were just as high as they are now. And deaths, I think, are even more now. So I just read in the paper this morning, LA Times, based on what they're saying, still have 10,000 cases a day. That's a 7-day average, and 200 deaths a day. So it just goes to say again that these orders are not based on any science or even any kind of study on how the disease is being transmitted. It's based on Newsom's political anxieties. What do you think?
No, I totally agree. Everyone has said from the beginning, there was a kind of a joke. If Joe Biden became president, all of a sudden people would be saying, coronavirus? What coronavirus? And, I think cynics are going to say, well, here's the latest sign of that becoming reality. I wrote a column on this for our Right by the Bay blog a few weeks back. And the governor, since the whole French Laundry mess, has really done a very poor job of communicating. Him and his administration. You just have to be honest and straight with people. Make the case. If you believe things are as bad as you think they are, and that these measures are needed to keep people safe and prevent a public health meltdown, well, make the case, be honest and level with people, and for the most part, good-natured people will go along with that. But it seems that all of these decisions, especially these decisions made back and forth in the past 2 or 3 months, they're all politically oriented. One of the things that Biden has already been talking about is data. We've got to have the data more readily available. We have to be more transparent and accessible and accountable. Well, interestingly, Governor Newsom is not making the data that they use to make these determinations about the stay-at-home order public. And we see, theoretically, it's based on ICU projections. Well, our projections aren't much better today than they were 4 weeks ago. Sacramento's stay-at-home order was lifted a few weeks back, and our ICU numbers were falling. So it makes you wonder if those secret numbers that they relied upon were his tanking political poll numbers.
Yeah, Tim, and I think another thing that's really got Californians upset is the lack of vaccines. The federal government says it's the state's problem. The states blame the feds. I've been trying to get my 90-year-old mother a vaccine. Friday and Saturday, I went to the LA County website, and there wasn't a single appointment available in the South Bay area, which, for listeners who don't know, that's south of the LA airport and north of Orange County. So that's got to be adding to this, the recall effort, frankly. Now it's up to 1.1 million signatures. How serious is this, Tim? And what are you hearing? Do you think that this could actually make it to the ballot?
Well, it seems pretty clear that they're going to get the signatures needed to make it on the ballot. And there certainly has been an explosion in the number of signatures since the French Laundry incident. And it inspired kind of the Darrell Issa moment. You remember in the Schwarzenegger recall back in the day, it was a grassroots thing that didn't really become serious until Darrell Issa wrote a big check to fund the professional signature gathering. Well, some big institutional donors have come in to write checks to fund the recall effort. Now, the recall making the ballot versus it actually passing and we have a new governor is a very different thing. I will say you're starting to see just how afraid Gavin Newsom is. Within the last week or so, the Democratic Party had a kind of a Zoom press conference, and they started calling the recall the California coup, trying to equate it to what happened in the armed insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. Well, Democrats and Republicans alike and media voices pushed back on that and said, this is not that at all. This is citizens upset with their government availing themselves of an important part of our direct democracy. And so that they're starting to use that kind of language and try to frame it in that light, it shows A, just how seriously they take the recall, and B, it shows how difficult a campaign it's going to be to run to defeat Gavin Newsom if it gets on the ballot, because how upset people are. Remember, the governor can raise money in a recall in unlimited clips. So that's going to be a very tall order to get the message out when governor could have $100 million or more to fight the recall campaign. But I did find it very interesting. Fellow who's the new editorial page editor for the Sacramento Bee tweeted, Gavin Newsom is going out of his way with his actions to make the recall a bipartisan affair. And I think the actions today and all these ongoing debates about school reopenings and other things where the governor is showing either poor leadership or hypocrisy, you're really getting a critical mass of Republicans and Democrats who are saying enough is enough.
Well, I'm still astounded at the numbers because we've got a pandemic and the signature gatherers don't have access to the crowds and the malls and the grocery stores and in the parks where they usually set up to gather signatures. So it's still astounding to me that they are already up to more than 1 million, and despite the pandemic. So another headline I read the other day was that Dianne Feinstein has filed fundraising paperwork. So it's been fueling a speculation that she might actually run again. She's 87 now. In 2024, when she's up, she's going to be 91. And I got to believe, Tim, that the Dems can't be so happy about this.
Well, remember, she just got through a bruising 2018 election where Kevin De Leon, an ambitious politician with nowhere to run, challenged her for re-election, and he actually won the Democratic Party endorsement over a legendary Democrat like Dianne Feinstein. So I think it's part of there are kind of two trends at play here. You know, we've had a lot of stability in our congressional delegation over the past 2 decades, and there are a lot of younger, ambitious politicians who are coming up through the ranks, and they want to run for Congress or they want to run for the U.S. Senate. And this is a redistricting year. You know, they may not be content to sit back and just bide their time in the aftermath of the AOCs of the world taking on and defeating long-term incumbents. You could see another ambitious Democrat decide to challenge Dianne Feinstein if she runs for re-election, and certainly for all of these other congressional seats in California. Now, I would temper the gossip a little bit because politicians often create fundraising committees for offices they don't intend to run for. It's probably at this point a place to park her money for now, the leftover money from the last campaign. But it's also probably a little bit of a signal to say, look, I'm not going off into the wilderness like you young people want me to do. So we shall see what happens.
So let's chat a little bit about what's happening at PRI. So next week is one of our big events of the year, the Sacramento Conference, which Tim is the master organizer of the conference. And this year, it's going to be all virtual. So the dates are February 4th and 5th. That's a Thursday and a Friday next week. And there's a silver lining in that it's virtual, and that we generally have this in Sacramento, and not everyone can make it to Sacramento. So it's available to everyone in the state and anyone who wants to sign up online. So Tim, maybe chat a little bit about the highlights of the Sacramento Conference this year.
Well, the overall theme is where the free market world is grappling with right now. How can we, in these uncertain times at the dawn of the Biden-Harris administration, how can we move the ball forward on free market ideas and free market reforms during, a time that be charitably described as being quite the uphill battle? So we're going to have panel discussions exploring the key issues facing our state right now and how free market ideas can not only make a difference, but perhaps could lead to the building of strange bedfellows toward bipartisan coalitions being built. So we're going to have a great panel discussion with our own healthcare A-team, Sally Pipes and Wayne Weingarten and Dr. Henry Miller, talking about all the ongoing healthcare challenges during COVID-19 and the policy lessons we've learned and what are some areas that we should be fighting for in the coming weeks. We're going to have a great panel discussion on California's water future. That's been a big battle over the past several years, in the Obama years and the Trump years, and certainly pendulum is going to swing again for sure during the Biden years. We really have some heavy hitters in the water debate, including Democratic Congressman Lou Correa and my old boss, Connie Conway, who was instrumental in water issues in the Central Valley for years and was instrumental in that landmark 2014 water bond. So if you're a water person and want to hear from some key players in the debate, that'll be a very interesting panel to listen to. We're also going to have panels on economic recovery, on school choice and education reform and online learning during COVID-19. You're also going to get a sneak preview of PRI's upcoming book on homelessness in California. It's going to be published in March, called No Way Home. And we're going to have the authors of our book are going to give you a sneak preview of what to look forward to from that book. And there may be a few surprises as well. So it should be a great event. And I encourage everybody, if you're interested in any of these issues, to sign up for our conference. It's free at pacificresearch.org.
So for this week's podcast, as some listeners might know, it's National School Choice Week. And usually there are events all over the country with the kids in those yellow gold scarves, which has now become a symbol of the school choice movement. So as part of our support for National School Choice, the podcast listeners are about to hear is from our webinar this week featuring Mia Giordano, a Bay Area student, a high school student, and our own Lance Izumi, PRI Senior Director of Education Studies. They co-authored a book titled A Kite in a Hurricane No More. Mia Giordano had a learning disability as a young child and managed to surmount, literally curing herself through hard work in a special education program using groundbreaking therapies. Now Mia is college bound. She's going to have a successful future, but she was one of the lucky ones because she had a choice. And most students are stuck in their school districts with limited education options. Mia's mother is also going to be on the podcast, Christine Zanello, and she'll talk about all of the barriers that she encountered in getting the right education for Mia. So Mia's message is to spread school choice to everyone, especially those who have learning disabilities, which is as important as ever. So here's Mia, her mother Christine, and Lance. Thanks for joining us.
Happy National School Choice Week. My name is Lance Izumi, and I'm the Senior Director of the Center for Education at the Pacific Research Institute. And I'm also the proud co-author, along with Mia Giordano, of the new PRI book entitled A Kite in a Hurricane No More, the journey of one young woman who overcame learning disabilities through science and educational choice. Today, we're going to discuss our book and the three different stories that it contains and that intertwine to form an interesting, innovative, and compelling narrative. The first story shares the challenges and ultimate triumph of my co-author, Mia Giordano, a young woman with serious learning disabilities that conventional schools couldn't help. Thankfully, she was able to choose a non-conventional educational option that resulted in a life-changing metamorphosis for her. The second story is a scientific journey into the mysteries of the brain. Advanced research shows that the brain is changeable and ever-changing. Yet traditional schools fail to incorporate research to help students with learning disabilities. But there are proven programs that incorporate the latest research, and Mia benefited from one such program. The last story is about public policy and why parents need to have educational choice options that meet the needs of their children. School choice has been a key to Mia's life success. Equity demands that the options available to her should be available to millions of other kids who would benefit from greater school choice. These intertwined stories converge to tell a larger and greater story of what the future of education in America could and should be. With us to talk about these three stories in our book is Mia Giordano, my co-author. Mia is a truly incredible person, and she was such a joy to work with on this book project. Thank you for being with us, Mia. She is a senior at Design Tech Charter High School in Redwood Shores outside of San Francisco. And Mia has just been accepted to Santa Clara University, which is a great accomplishment. But as all of you will find out shortly, it is even more of an achievement given how far Mia has been able to come in her life. Also with us is Christine Zanello, Mia's amazing and wonderful mom. Christine is the mother to 3 children and has been an advocate for education reform based on the concept of neuroplasticity, which sees the brain as very changeable. Finally, we are honored to have with us Barbara Arrowsmith Young, the founder of the Arrowsmith Program, which helped Mia change her life and which has helped children from around the world. Barbara is a true pioneer in brain-based education. So let's start off now by asking Mia, first of all, could you just introduce yourself, Mia, to our audience and tell them right now where you are in your life?
All right. Well, as Lance beautifully said, I'm a senior at Design Tech High School in the Redwood Shores on the Oracle campus. And right now I'm just a second semester college senior. So I'm just getting by my classes, doing the best, and can't wait to start college next year. And I'm very happy.
That's terrific, Mia. Tell us a little bit about some of your life goals.
Probably my biggest life goal is to probably be a policymaker. I really definitely want to get into the education sector and start revolutionizing education, especially for kids with needs like me, and definitely be an activist for school choice and hopefully get like all sorts of different types of schooling out mainstream and become a new normal in this country.
Well, that's certainly needed. And it's, I think, certainly apropos that this is National School Choice Week and that we're telling you, going to go into your story. And, and as you mentioned, school choice was an important part of your life. So tell us, what took place early on in your life, where you found out that you had these learning disabilities, what they stemmed from, and, how things were for you as a child growing up with these learning disabilities.
Well, I never really knew what a learning disability was until I was about 12 years old, really. Like what I really knew what was going on in my head, but I always knew, even from age 6, I felt different. Like things couldn't click. I got things a lot slower than the other kids. Like when I was reading a book, it would take me about 20 minutes to read a page, while the other kids were already on page 20 in that time. So it was definitely a very not sad childhood. I had a lot of great memories, but like I remember just like taking the world in so differently than my peers, and it just made me feel really insecure, and I didn't understand what was wrong with me.
So, in terms of like some of the specific learning disabilities that you had to contend with, like tell us about like what exactly were some of the things that were hampering your ability to learn?
It was definitely my auditory processing issues. When my mom would always say this, when she ever gave me 3 directions to do, like go clean your room, put away your toys, and like get me a glass of water, you'd be lucky if I would get one of those things done. Like it was really in one ear and out the other for me. And that's when I really, really, really started to notice like, what can I do to fix this? Like and I kind of almost felt helpless in a way. I just didn't know why it wouldn't click, why I wouldn't, and I would forget about it.
And, when it's one thing when your mom tells you to, do a few chores around the house and you might forget the last chore out of her list of chores. It's very different though, and has more impact when a teacher may be talking in front of the classroom, giving you instructions or giving you lessons about some subject, and you're only getting half the information, right?
Mm-hmm. I would always be asking my peers, like, what's going on? Even I remember being in first grade and we were solving like events of a picture, like like a boy riding a bicycle. And I just was completely lost. I didn't know like how the boy like got on his bicycle, like the picture he got on his bicycle. Well, he started riding it, he fell off, and then he started riding it again. Like I would confuse that timeline. And that's like thinking about that and seeing me now is just completely polar opposite. And I can't believe that like that didn't get through for me.
Well, and I know too, and I want to get to Christine in just a second, but I know that in my own work, researching how the brain works and how people learn and are able to go up to higher order thinking, that you have to have a base, a foundation of things that are pretty automatic in your head. And that if you don't have that sort of automatic recall, let's say multiplication table or that sort of thing, it then becomes very difficult to then build on top of that and be able to get to more difficult concepts.
Exactly, Lance. 100%.
Well, let me ask Christine, as Mia's mom, could you tell us from your vantage point what her early childhood was like, and how you came to hear about the Arrowsmith program.
Well, when Mia was when she was a baby and growing up as a small toddler, and we noticed no deficits at all. As a matter of fact, she crawled early, spoke early. She was really intent on cracking the code for the English language, and she does have the gift of gab, so we see that transcended throughout her whole life. But so as we were in her younger days and going into preschool, we started to see some things change a bit because she was having trouble with her phonological awareness, being able to formulate the sounds together, to meld them together, to start to learn to read. And then she began to stutter a bit to try to get the words out. And then we noticed some things where she was having difficulty breathing. And the breathing was really concerning. And that was the red flag that started me to deep dive into what it is that's going on with her. And as we proceeded through this journey of discovery, we recognized that she had sleep apnea and had developed it through her childhood. And it's a very severe form of it, so severe that she would stop breathing for periods of time while she was sleeping. And the pervasive extent of it was then materialized in what we saw going on after that. Like she talked about the auditory processing and some other things that were developing. So through the problems associated as consequences of sleep apnea. And but in light of it all, she was still a happy young lady and had many friends and so on. And then as it began to impact her more, as things started to ramp up in school, that's when we saw the major shift. And first grade, second grade, and by third grade, it was really a challenge. And I had ramped up some extra help for her, still searching for other ways to help her other than giving her competence strategies, compensatory strategies, apologize. And continue on there. I had always had in the back of my head, because in 2007, I was very fortunate to pick up Dr. Norman Doidge's book, Brain That Changes Itself. So that was my introduction into the whole area of neuroplasticity. And his brilliant work really drove home the point in my mind that if things are happening to the brain that are causing problems, there must be some way for it to repair itself. And it's ever changing and not fixed. So springboarding into learning about Arrowsmith, I had the very good fortune, brains and luck are great, but luck sometimes is even better, because I was very fortunate to have a woman by the name of Claire Goss, who was an educational psychologist who knew about my thinking and who had also worked with Mia, who introduced me to Dr. Howard Eaton. And Howard Eaton wrote a book called Brain School, and he was speaking in our hometown at Christmas time. So I made sure that I got an invitation to that event. And that was where the aha moment, everything that I had been searching for was right there in front of me. And so at the end of his presentation, I immediately went up and spoke to him and said, I have a daughter that I think can benefit from Barbara Arrowsmith's program in the Arrowsmith School. And that was the beginning of this fantastic journey to be able to have Mia attend the school and remediate the learning disabilities.
Well, that's terrific. Let me ask you as a follow-up, Christine, tell me about how, up to the time you found Arrowsmith, the schools that Mia was in, they were trying to address some of her problems, but in a very ineffective way. Could you just say a word or two about, some of the things that weren't working for her?
Yes, sure. In reading, instead of working with her directly one-on-one, the school recommended a computer program. So she would spend time sitting in front of a computer and working off of prompts with headphones on to try to learn how to read. That was really ineffective. And then we delved into some other compensatory strategies, which were somewhat effective. The Slingerland program is a widely used tool. But once again, they're compensatory strategies. So you're not actually remediating the problems. You're giving yourself an opportunity to scaffold and deal with the deficits. And that's the real big difference. The schools that exist, public, private, charter, whichever, some specialized schools for children with learning disabilities, the focus is on strengthening their strengths and using the compensatory strategies over and over again in order to be able to continue on with their studies.
Yeah, no,
that's the big difference. And there isn't any other school that does what Arrowsmith Program does, where it's targeted specifically to remediate the learning deficit.
And I think that's an important point, and it's actually a great segue to talk to Barbara, because yes, I mean, throughout conventional schools, especially in the public system, they use these compensatory strategies where you basically use what's strong in your brain to compensate for what's weak. And that might work okay, or you muddle along, but your brain never becomes a strong whole. And that's where the Arrowsmith program comes in. And I want to, thank Barbara Arrowsmith again for being with us. And Barbara, you have a fascinating life story. Could you tell us about your life with learning disabilities and what you learned about the way our brains function, and how you came to create the Arrowsmith program?
Absolutely. I'm delighted to. My journey, I kind of joke, begins with my brain, or my lack thereof. I started schooling a long time ago in the late 1950s. And at that time, there wasn't even the term learning disability. It didn't exist. So in grade 1, I was diagnosed as having a mental block, and being quite literal, like I had problems with comprehension, sort of like what Mia described. I actually thought I had a wooden piece of wood in my head that made learning difficult. That was my vision, that there was this big cube that was getting in the way of learning. And I feel that in grade 1, I was given a life sentence. I overheard my teacher speaking to my mother saying that I would always struggle in school. Basically, that all of my schooling would be difficult. It would be a challenge. And my mother was told not to have high expectations for her daughter. So it was kind of like game over in grade 1. And certainly there were certain things that my teacher was accurate about. I hope that I did amount to something in my life. So I hope she wasn't accurate about that. But certainly my schooling was a struggle. In those early years, I struggled to learn how to read. I struggled to learn how to write. And my mother was an educator. She had actually won an award in the province of Ontario, where I'm from, for her contribution to education. So she was determined that her daughter was going to learn to read and to write. So every day I would come home at lunch and I get flashcards, the compensatory or drills, with letters and with numbers and number facts. And, I'm eternally grateful to my mother, because if she hadn't, spent that time and been so determined, I don't know where I would be. So I eventually learned how to read. I learned how to write. I learned how to do basic mathematics, but it was like papering over the difficulty. I was using my strengths because I had a strong visual memory and a strong auditory memory, but I didn't really understand what I was reading or what I was hearing or what I was listening to. So the learning disability or learning difficulty was still there. but I could mask it. And a lot of times, as children, we want to appear competent. We want to appear that we're getting it. So, I would fake it. And there's this concept of an imposter phenomena that, we're kind of afraid that if somebody looks too closely, the house of cards will fall down and they'll see that we're struggling. And I had multiple learning difficulties, when I later came to understand these. I mean, Mia's talked about auditory processing. I struggled if I heard something to really understand it. It was almost like I was listening to a foreign language and my translator wasn't working. I mean, I heard the words, but I struggled to attach meaning to those words. Things like mathematics, I could learn the rote procedure, but I had no idea, like, why did you add this number with this number versus this number over here? If I would see a bunch of numbers, I just add them up in random order, which, didn't get the right answer. And most of my notebooks had big red X's, and my teacher would write not very kind notes, thinking that I wasn't working very hard, but I was working really hard. And sometimes on exams, I would get 100% because it played to my strengths. And other times I get 10% because they played to my difficulties. And the teachers would conclude that I hadn't worked hard for that 10%. Well, I worked just as hard to get that 10% as I did for the 100%. And this is what's confusing. When you look at an individual with learning difficulties, it's kind of having a brain that's capable and incapable at the same time, because there's some things that we can do with ease and, no effort. And then there are other things that take incredible effort and will. And sometimes no matter how much effort or will, we can't accomplish them. So for me, the world of comprehension, it was like, I kind of describe it like living in a fog. Like that was my world. I lived in a fog. And I felt like meaning just kind of really disappeared. So, understanding concepts, ideas. And then I had a problem where I didn't know where the left side of my body was in space. So I was incredibly uncoordinated. Nobody wanted me on their sports team because, I would trip over things or bump into people. And then I had a spatial difficulty. I couldn't read maps. I couldn't navigate. I would get lost all the time. So I learned early that I had to give myself an extra half hour or an extra hour when I was going anywhere to let myself get lost multiple times. So certainly, yes, I cannot say that there was really any time in my schooling that I approached it with joy. I approached it with stress and anxiety, and though with will and effort, because I wanted to succeed. And I used all the compensations, that Mia and Christine are talking about, because in my schooling, that's all there were compensations, because the belief was, when I went to school, your brain is fixed. There was no concept that it was plastic or modifiable. So the idea was, accept your limitations, work within them, try to use strengths as best you can to compensate. But the problem with compensations is they take extra effort and energy, and you're trying to use parts of your brain to do something that they aren't designed to do, right? They're trying to compensate for the areas that aren't working. And that's certainly what we're seeing in the research in the brains of students with learning difficulties, is a brain that's working so much harder, but less efficiently, right? Like, because these areas that are underperforming or underconnected, that aren't able to do what they're supposed to do, other parts of the brain are hyperconnecting to work really hard to compensate. So the brain is a mirror of what that student's experience is in the school. So, that was my experience. And I was very lucky. My father was a scientist and an inventor, and he had this belief that he instilled in me at a young age. He said, there's a problem in the world and there's no solution currently. He said, it's your responsibility to go out and try to find a solution. And then he said, if the rest of the world tells you you can't do it, don't listen. He said, this is how science goes forward. So I feel like I set out on a quest, having no idea kind of where I was going, because I got lost all the time and not really understanding exactly what the quest was. But that's what led me to come across the research that led to this work, which led me to meet Mia and Christine to be able to transform these lives. So I'm passionate about this work and trying to make it more accessible.
Well, that's fascinating, Barbara. Could you just tell me, because having read your book, which is a fantastic book, by the way, and everyone should who's interested in this whole area of brain research should read your book, The Woman Who Changed Her Brain.
Mhm.
And but you mentioned that you had an aha moment when you read about the research stemming from an injury suffered by a Russian soldier,
Mhm.
in one of the wars many years ago, and how that Russian soldier was able to deal with his problems. Could you just briefly tell us about that aha moment?
Sure. Yes, this was the moment that changed my life. And that's why I dedicate my book to Alexander Luria, who was the Russian neuroscientist that wrote the book, The Man with the Shattered World, which told the story of Lyova Zazetsky, this Russian soldier that had a very localized head wound during World War II. And this book was Zazetsky's journal describing his challenges, and then Luria explaining what was going on in his brain. And as I read Zazetsky's journal, who was writing in the late 1940s, I thought, this man is living my life. I mean, we were using the same language. I was keeping a journal, in the 1960s. And we were both talking about living in a fog where meaning was ephemeral, where, it would just disappear, that we couldn't grasp concepts. We couldn't tell time. I was now 25 years old. I couldn't read an analog clock because I couldn't understand the relationship of an hour hand to a minute hand. Zazetsky, before his wound, could tell time. After his wound, he couldn't. I never understand fractions because it's a relationship of a part to a whole. Zazetsky was studying mathematics before his wound. After his wound, he couldn't understand fractions. So my aha moment was, it's my brain. Like before that, I knew I had lots of problems. I didn't know what the source was. And when you're trying to solve a problem, you kind of have to start with the source. So now I knew something is not working in my brain. I knew I didn't have shrapnel in my brain, but for some reason it wasn't working. And then at the same time, I came across the work of Mark Rosenzweig, the psychologist at Berkeley in California, that was looking at this idea of neuroplasticity. And he was working with rats. And what he found is if you put rats in a stimulating environment, they became better learners and their brains actually changed at a physiological level. And he called that activity-dependent plasticity because the activity drove plastic changes in the brain, which led to better learning. So more dendrites, more synapses, more glia cells, enlarged capillaries, more neurotransmitters. I thought if rats can do that, surely humans can do that. And I went to my professors at that time because I was in graduate school and they all said, there's no human neuroplasticity, like get over it. But I was desperate, right? So I wasn't doing this as an abstract, scientific experiment. I was doing this to try to save my life because I didn't see a future for myself, with all the struggles that I was having. So that was my aha moment, that you can actually identify what's not working in the brain through Luria's work. And then maybe you can create an activity or a task or an exercise that works that part of the brain kind of like a muscle to strengthen it. And I set out this was in 1978, and created 3 different exercises for myself because I had 3 very different problems. And as I went through it, I saw the transformation. I could now do things with ease that before with the best will in the world, I could not do. So I thought, oh my gosh, there is human neuroplasticity. I'm proof, and I'm going to take it out into the world to help other people. And here we are today with, Mia, that this is my legacy is making this work accessible, which is my passion. This work should be accessible to every student that can benefit from it.
Well, that's so inspiring, Barbara. Well, so you ended up creating this program, and Mia, you're the beneficiary, one of the beneficiaries of Barbara's program, the Arrowsmith Program. So could you tell us your experience with the Arrowsmith Program, and how did you progress? And Barbara talked about one of her aha moments. Tell us about some of your breakthrough moments as you went through this process.
Okay, so if I had to describe the Arrowsmith Program in one word, Barbara will know, it is hard. It is hard. It is mentally exhausting at times. It feels like you are going, for me, it felt like I was going on a 10-mile run every day in my head. Like my brain was constantly working, like it was just working so hard. And it was really just so, it was just the most difficult program for the first year. Then after the years, it got easier and easier because I began to get better and began to get better at these programs that I was doing. But over it all, it was a hard program, but so worth it in the end. My biggest aha moment was actually my last year at the Arrowsmith program. There were little ones like when there's this specific program that I loved. It was my favorite program in all of the Arrowsmith program. It's called Clocks. My favorite program ever. And so I graduated from the 8-hand clock to the 10-hand clock. And that was the biggest moment of my life. I was like, oh my gosh, I can read a 10-hand clock now. It was awesome. If you asked me to describe it now, I could not. I don't remember it. It's been 5 years, but the biggest moment for me probably was like my second to last day of working at the program. It was my last exercise that I was working on. It was called Phrases, where you put your headphones on and you listen to these words, and it can be, I think, like anywhere from like 5 to 12 words. Barbara, you can correct me on that. But so I remember listening to this long phrase, and I hated doing that because it just wouldn't stick. And I remember this one day, I put on my headphones. I think it's just going to be a normal day. I'm not going to do that well. I'm barely going to get 3 in the row. Like, it's just not going to work out for me. So I put the headphones on and I listened to it, and I could hear it. Like, I always could hear the words, but I could like hear it. Like I could see it. I could hear it. I remembered it. And I went over and I said the words, and it was correct. And then I did that for 30 plus in a row. First time after one listen, I could do it. And that was huge. I started crying my eyes out because I was never able to do that, let alone listen to one thing and remember it. Like I could listen to 20 things and remember it. That was my biggest moment. And that's when I realized this worked. After so many years, this finally worked. I'm done. I did it. I finished.
And I think that, it's important for our viewers and listeners to understand, when Mia mentions that she could read a 10-handed clock, that for people with certain types of learning disabilities, reading a clock, just reading a 2-handed clock, is extremely difficult. And it's amazing, when you read some of the brain research that has been conducted by people like Dr. Greg Rose, who we have interviewed for this book, how being able to read the hands of a clock are so connected to not just being able to tell time, but being able to connect it to so many different things. And so that if you can read the hands of a clock, you can count backwards by 7. You can do all kinds of other types of operations, in addition to just read time. And so if you can't read a clock, it has a real impact on so many different areas of your life. And Mia, I was thinking that one of the great things I remember reading in your section of the book was when you said that, you came into the Arrowsmith program basically having an extremely difficult time reading at all. And then the summer before you graduated from the Arrowsmith program, you read over 50 books. And so maybe you might want to say a word or two about that.
Yeah, I remember that. That was over like a good chunk of time, but there were some exercises that I was doing because my biggest issue was reading, first of all, and getting it, and also the main idea. So there was an exercise that helped me find the main idea of certain phrases and stories. It's actually called L-Think. It was also a good exercise. So my second year after Arrowsmith, I just was getting reading. I just picked up a book. My mom gave me just a random book to read, and I just loved it. My English teacher gave me a random book to read, and I just loved it. And then I started getting really interested in historical fiction. So I read about like 1600 slavery in America, like the Revolutionary War, like all these different stories that connected to actual real events. And over one summer, I read 50 plus books, and it was awesome. And then I actually during that time, developed the love for Shakespeare.
And I remember, and this was, I think for me, reading, your section of the book, one of the real beautiful moments for me reading was when you were talking about your Shakespeare teacher and you actually pointing out an aspect to I think it was the play, was it Macbeth? Mm-hmm. Where, you actually came up with an observation that he, as a Shakespeare expert, had actually never really thought about before. Mm-hmm. And he then said that, it really came to the point where the student became the teacher. And that's an incredible moment.
He was an incredible teacher. He really taught me how to find the meanings of the story, and always taught me, like, a word is not there just because it's there. It has some meaning to it, and always look into one word and how it matches with the rest of the 10 going forward. And that's what really stuck with me when I did his class. He was an amazing guy. Love him.
And well, let me turn to Barbara again, and then we'll get to Christine. But Barbara, you hear Mia's story, and I'm sure you've heard, many stories like Mia over the years through your program, where you have somebody who basically couldn't read or couldn't read very well at all, just like in your case. And now, she's, making these incredible insights into very difficult material like Shakespeare. I mean, what are your observations about what Mia has gone through, her experience, and what does the research tell you about what your program is doing?
Yeah. So I think, Mia's story, like my story, is very, very typical of the stories of students going through Arrowsmith. Fundamentally, our brain mediates our relationship to our world, right? There is a reason we have this organ, in our heads that we carry with us everywhere we go. It really filters our perceptions, our understanding not only of ourselves, but of other people, of our world. And it's incredibly complex. I felt when I started reading about the brain, I fell in love, right? Because it is just this amazing organ, and we don't fully understand it. My work, we can currently identify 19 different cognitive functions, and we have programs to stimulate those functions. But I know the brain is more complex than just 19, but the really critical ones, as Mia has talked about, my experience and the experience of thousands of other students, around the world going through this program. And I think, what's critical is really understanding these functions. You talked about, reading or not being able to read a two-handed clock. And it's not about the two-handed clock per se. It's what that function is in the brain that allows somebody to do that or not do it. And, Mia had that challenge. I had that challenge. And it's fundamental. You walk around in this sense or state of uncertainty, like living in the fog, where you can never really verify meaning. So what Mia just so beautifully talked about in Shakespeare, she wouldn't have been able to do that without that capacity being strengthened in her brain. For me, when I had that difficulty, I lived in what I called lag time. I would listen to conversations, I would memorize them because I had a verbatim auditory memory, and I'd walk away like a tape recorder and play those conversations over and over, and sometimes for 2 hours, and then finally think, oh, I think that's what the person was saying. But that person hadn't waited for 2 hours for me to get what they were saying. So I wasn't part of human discourse, which was incredibly sad and lonely. So much broader than just school. And as that function improved, and I have to confess, Mia, I didn't even ever master the 8-handed clock. So you're more advanced in that function than I am. And again, it's not about clocks. It's about making your brain process relationships and see connections and see deep meaning. And when I got my breakthrough, I was part of human discourse for the first time in my life. I could actually listen to someone, understand them while they were talking, make an appropriate comment, And then there was that whole back and forth that had never happened in my life. Like before, I was frightened of people because I think someone's going to say something to me and I'm going to smile and have no idea what they were saying. So these challenges are so much broader than reading, writing, and arithmetic. And yes, they impact that. We have programs for people with nonverbal learning difficulties. These are the people, we probably all know somebody that's awkward socially. They don't pick up the social cues. They stand too close to us when, we're sort of backing away. And does that affect them academically? No, but it affects them in all of their social relations. We can enhance that cognitive function so these people can navigate the social world and negotiate. The auditory memory that Mia talked about. We have students that come to us that are labeled as being defiant or difficult because their mother asked them to do 3 things and they walk away and only do 1. And often the interpretation is, that child is just resisting or they're not cooperating. Well, it could be an auditory memory problem. And I worked with a pilot that had that problem. He couldn't remember the instructions from the air traffic controller, which was
That's not a good thing.
Not a good thing.
That's not a good thing.
He had a compensatory strategy, but my worry was, what if that air traffic controller is really busy and can't repeat the instructions? So, we worked with him and he now can hold the information. But I think, one parent said school is just a metaphor for life, that if these problems are there during school, they're going to follow that individual through life. As for me, I was 26 when I created this work, and we've worked with people up into their 80s. So, to me, the research is telling us the brain is incredibly capable of change if we can identify the function. That's the first piece, because you have to know what you're trying to strengthen, and then find an activity to strengthen that, and then make, as Mia said, it's really hard work, right? I wish, we could wave a magic wand and all these things would go away. But to change the brain in a meaningful way is hard work. So there's this concept of effortful processing. You have to get the brain engaged and you have to give it a workout. And then the next day, you have to start all over again. And as Mia said, she built up her strength. So eventually it became easier. And at the point that it's sort of on automatic pilot and there's no more efforting, the person, that capacity is in place for the person to lead. And in our research, we're seeing changes in really important networks, the executive control network, which is thinking, planning, problem solving, self-awareness, putting yourself into somebody else's shoes, working memory. We're seeing it in attention. We're seeing it in, cognitive control, setting goals, the salience network, which is, what's critical, what's relevant, what's essential. And then we're seeing, actually, we've done some research and seeing reduction in cortisol, actually physiologically, the stress hormone is reduced because these individuals are no longer stressed, right? Because, as Mia says, she can go out and conquer the world, right? So, other than the normal stressors that we have every day, you don't have the stress that you're carrying of having a learning difficulty and knowing everything is going to be hard and a challenge. And one thing years ago that broke my heart is, I was talking to students with, in my school, and they talked about that they didn't dare to dream. At a certain point, they shut down their dreams. They just stopped because they figured, what's the point? I'm not going to be able to realize this. And I think what this work does is it gives these individuals the cognitive resources to not only dream, but actually to effectively realize their dreams. And that's why I'm going to track Mia down the road there and see the changes that she's going to make in policy or whatever she wants to do in her life, right? The doors are open. And that's what a lot of adults have said to me, is that they feel their career was chosen for them because when they came to make that choice, so many doors were closed. And I think this opens the doors, and people may make the same choice, but now it's a choice, right? It's not a forced choice. So yeah, I think, what our premise is, you change the brain, which changes fundamental cognitive capacity, which then changes all aspects of learning, academics, life learning, and it leads to social emotional well-being, and then transforms the future and the reality for that individual. So I think that's what this work is doing.
That's really incredible. Yeah, I think for our audience, the bottom line is that the brain is interconnected. All the different parts are interconnected. You may have weak parts, but those weak parts can be worked upon and become a strong whole. And so, which goes to, what Christine has talked about earlier about neuroplasticity. I think that, when I was reading your book, Barbara, that one of the things that I just thought was fantastic was when one of your other aha moments was when you went into a library and pulled out all of these books on philosophy, and you could actually understand them.
Yeah, it was profound, because before I would, like Mia said, I'd read a page 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 times and never be certain that I understood or comprehended. And so I had the 100 books as I was testing myself. I thought maybe this is a fluke. Maybe I picked a really easy book, right? But after 100 books and I've been able to understand each page, I realized actually something had significantly changed.
Well, that's fantastic. Christine, let me go to you now. You saw Mia go through the Arrowsmith program, and she was concurrently doing academic courses as well. When you took her out of the conventional schools, you decided to homeschool her. You were able to then, access the Arrowsmith program. What did you observe, especially about Mia's progress?
Well, the special thing and why I'm such an advocate of school choice is you just outlined it. We were able to create a program to coexist with what Mia was doing in developing her capacities to learn better. I'm going to just take a quote that Barbara has repeated many times, and I think it's so profound. The Arrowsmith program is not teaching content. It's not teaching skill. It's changing the brain's capacity to learn. So these exercises, as Mia described, as Barbara described, continually work to strengthen the capacities that were weakened for whatever reason, whether they were born with it or with Mia, it was an acquired through sleep apnea and so on. The constant painstaking work. It's like a marathon. You're running that marathon and you keep on going. Actually, it's triathlon, or it could even be bigger than that, because as the student continues, they make milestones, sometimes small, sometimes enormous. Like Mia talked about her aha moment. Barbara talked about her aha moment. And so in doing the continual work was giving us an opportunity to observe and give her, Mia, then some academic work that she could succeed at, because it's very important to realize success, because small children especially, they don't see the long ball. They only see what they're doing right here, right now. And there has to be some sort of reward to what they're doing to keep them going. And so that's why the academics are brought in later, because I say this all the time. If you have an engine of a car that's not working right, you have to fix the engine first before you can pour information into a vessel. Otherwise, it's a waste of time. It's a waste of the child's time. It's a waste of everyone's time. So allow the process of the Arrowsmith program to do its work while the child or the adult is continually working to fix those weaknesses, to strengthen those weaknesses. And then you add on top of that, when there's opportunity for them to understand and be able to succeed at the schoolwork, you gradually bring it in. So she was doing math, she was doing science, she was doing history, and she was taking some language courses as well with Italian, a little bit. So it was a gradual progress in adding more and more as she was able to comprehend. And then once these weaknesses were remediated, then we just saw her take off like a shot, especially what she talked about with Shakespeare, to be able to understand and be able to converse with her teacher was a tremendous accomplishment. And then you have then the whole thing of we talk about in education is to love to learn. You don't want to struggle constantly over and over the years with learning disabilities, because like Barbara says, it takes so much more brain work and so much more effort. It's exhausting, and learning isn't fun. And the challenges become so insurmountable, a lot of kids give up. And the Arrowsmith program, because of the way that it's structured so brilliantly, it gives the student an opportunity to see those changes. And once those changes begin, then they can work in their academic studies to continue on. I mean, Mia's in calculus. She just finished AP biology. I mean, these are subjects that are intense and require a lot of painstaking time and to be able to understand the core subject. To be able to do that now is completely rewarding. I don't know where she would have been without the Arrowsmith program, because it is proven successful, and it's proven successful on paper, and it's proven success in my daughter and those that I have also met who have gone through the Arrowsmith program and gone through and done so many protective things with their lives.
Yeah, no, I think that another beautiful moment that I thought we related in the book was when we talked with one of Mia's teachers, Kelly Ferreira, and Kelly was telling us, one of Mia's Arrowsmith teachers, and Kelly was telling us that there was a beautiful moment when Mia had been trying so hard to write things, and then all of a sudden, at one point, after a long time of trying, Mia wrote something, and Kelly looked at that and looked at her and said, "You wrote this? This is beautiful." And then Mia broke down in tears, at that moment. And that, to me, that's just a poignant moment when, it's one of those forks in the road moments where now Mia's life was going to go off in a direction, that was very different than what had been kind of programmed for her, previously. And so Mia, could you describe, to us now, okay, you went into the Arrowsmith program with a lot of learning disabilities. And one of the things that we haven't mentioned to our audience is that you had a very pronounced stutter when you first went into the program. So it wasn't just that you had difficulty reading and doing math and the academic subjects. It was difficult for you to speak as well. And so contrast how it was with you going into that program versus, how it was after the 4 years you were in the Arrowsmith program. You strengthened those weak parts of your brain through the various aspects of this program. And so what were you like at the end?
So in the beginning, I can just say I was just very young, and I didn't see the long the long shot of it all. I thought I didn't see any purpose into what I was doing. I just thought I was always going to be like this, to where I'm at now, and at the end to being able to read very complex texts, to understanding complex math, to understanding complex history, and to talk with adults and talk with peers and have fun, and everything coming pretty easy to me. Like I see how much I've benefited from it. And I don't know who I would be if I didn't do that program, but I know I wouldn't be here. I know I wouldn't be this Mia.
Yeah, I think that one of the great things I love about your description about how you felt before and after, and given that we all live in California here, you said that you felt like you were, before you went into the Arrowsmith program, you were stuck in traffic on the Bay Bridge.
Yes.
And then afterwards you said that you felt like you were a Ferrari on the open road.
Exactly my feeling.
And so now that you've gone through the Arrowsmith program, now you were pulled out of the conventional schools by your mom, and you were homeschooled, and were able to access the Arrowsmith program as part of your homeschooling agenda or program. Tell us, and since this is National School Choice Week, tell us about what your thoughts are about the importance of giving the ability to all children to have that same opportunity that you had to be able to improve your life.
Yeah. Well, I tried everything. I did a very elite private school in my early life. And then I did my Arrowsmith mixed with my homeschooling. And then now I'm so happy at my charter school. So I've had a very non-conventional schooling experience. And I think it's so important that children have these options to try and figure out where they learn the best, because ultimately that's how we are going to create better people in this society, is if we have proper education for them to learn and maximize their needs and maximize their time. Because if they're just doing it for the grade and just trying to get to a certain part where they're not going to be able to do anything, then what's the point? What's the point if you don't have the knowledge to succeed?
No, that's right. That's right. I mean, and I should mention too that you have really been in every single sector of education. You started off at a public school, right?
Kindergarten.
Kindergarten, a public kindergarten, which didn't work out for you for various reasons.
No,
you then went to a private school, which didn't work out for you for reasons that you mentioned, and people can read the book for greater details. But then, thankfully, we had the homeschooling option that you were then able to take advantage of. And now you're thriving in a charter school.
Exactly. And I think homeschooling personally was my favorite, because I had a mom who was really interested in history and really interested in travel. So I got to go learn things by doing things. And that I feel like is most needed in our society, because you learn the best when you see things and when you do things and when you can hold something, when it's like you can see it, hold all the senses. And that's how I learned the best. And that's what I love the most. And also, I was able to have so many opportunities where I got to talk to all of her really, really smart friends and absorb all this information that was coming at me at such a young age, which I think also benefited me in talking and conversing with adults and advocating for what I want and what I need.
Well, I mean, and that's a great, seg actually into my question for Christine, that in light of Mia's experience then with Arrowsmith, so tell us as a parent, what it means for you to have had the ability to choose a program like Arrowsmith that's not available in the conventional school systems.
Well, it just proves that the one size fits all approach doesn't work. And the more that we discuss this and have forums like this to educate parents, to give them the courage to go outside the system and recognize that their child may learn differently, or their child may have different needs, or just in general, they have an idea of certain types of subjects that they personally would like to teach them. Mia mentioned history. I mean, I was a history major in college. I've been a scholar of history, and specifically American history and the Renaissance. So I was able to impart my knowledge in an educational fashion. I'm a lawyer, I don't practice, but I learned the Socratic method. So we had all sorts of fun with the Q&A there. I had probably had more fun than she did, but the overarching theme of being able to empower parents to give their children an opportunity through education in ways that they see fit is probably the most greatest freedom a parent can ever have, and an opportunity gift that a parent can give a child. And to be able to filter out the misinformation and what I call the lemming approach, where everybody just stands in line and goes and goes and goes, and you're on this treadmill, on this wheel, actually like a hamster wheel, and you're going through emotions, and these children are learning for the grade and not learning for the sake of learning, not learning because they love to learn, not doing a deep dive in subjects that they particularly really enjoy or will serve them later on in their life. And, so many times I heard through this process, well, what about gaps in her education? If she's not doing geometry at 7th grade, she'll be behind. Well, there is no behind, because if you look at it through a global perspective, and I always attribute it to going to London and the underground, and there's a big sign that says mind the gap, right? And you have to step over the gap. And, in England, they learn certain subjects that are really important in the United States, and even go even smaller than that within the individual states. Like, when you've got sugar cube projects, we've all done sugar cube projects, right? Well, up in Alaska, they may build an igloo out of sugar cubes. In New York, they may build the Empire State Building, and so on. So my point is the freedom and the empowerment for parents is so important, because then you are in control of your child's education and you're not handing it off. And especially children with special needs who have these opportunities that Mia had with the Arrowsmith program to actually remediate her learning deficits. To have that opportunity was the greatest gift that I could give my daughter. And like I said, the luck, it was a stroke of luck to have had the opportunity to hear what the program spoke about, and then to be able to see it, and then go on and be able to offer it to Mia. And now she's a senior in high school, ready to graduate come June 1st.
Well, and I wish that one of the things that we could have done on this webinar would have been to have had, like, let's say a clip of Mia, before she went through this metamorphosis, so people could really see visually, what Mia was like back then, and how what we're seeing here. And we were talking about this before we went on the air, that, how impossible it is to think about that Mia could come to the point where she's now, a panelist on this webinar, compared to what she was, when she first started her journey. And, what an incredible journey it's been. And, I think people who read this book are going to be very inspired by that. And, to end our webinar, I want to ask Barbara one last question. In our book, earlier in this webinar, I think Christine mentioned the education psychologist, Clara Goss, who is a longtime ed psychologist for a Bay Area County Office of Education. And she had said to us in one of our interviews for this book that even though a program like Arrowsmith may be effective, the regular public schools, unfortunately, will likely not adopt it because it doesn't fit the current paradigm, which emphasizes these compensatory strategies that we've been talking about, using strong parts of your brain to compensate for weak parts of your brain, basically. And so, in light of that reality, tell us about your view of school choice. And in the book, we talk about the Florida Gardner Scholarship Program, which gives state-funded scholarships to special needs students to access programs like Arrowsmith, which are offered by private schools in Florida, and which receive these scholarships and which children and their parents can take advantage of. So could you give us your ending thoughts on that?
Sure. Well, I think we have to change the paradigm, first and foremost. I think, Christine said it very well. There is no one size fits all. If we think about the complexity of human beings and the complexity of the brain, we absolutely need choice. It really just should be available. And I think, for students, that have learning difficulties like myself, like Mia, like the students that we work with, I think if you want to look at it economically, it's a loss of human capital, that is very short-sighted to think that, if we put a little bit of money in for like these scholarships, the programs that, you talked about in Florida, which we have students accessing in schools in Florida to receive the Arrowsmith program, that small amount of money, that small investment in these children's lives and their futures will pay off in huge dividends in the end. If one wants to look at it just from an economic view, but also the social capital. I mean, these are the individuals, I think about myself, very much like me. I I wouldn't be alive today, right? Before I came across, the work or the book by Luria, I was planning how to end my life, and I had tried at age 13, not successfully. That would have been a loss. I see other students that have those kind of experiences. Like, to me, it's so wrong-headed not to put the investment into our children and choice in education so that each individual can get what they need to realize their competencies, to realize their dreams. And to me, this work, we've actually done research in just regular schools, not even students with learning difficulties, a grade 1 class, a grade 3 class. If you have a brain, we can enhance and change cognitive functioning. We need to put the brain into the education equation. It actually really isn't there other than a passive organ that we think we have to fill with content. We can change that organ. As Christine said, we can actually change the capacity of the learner to learn, which they carry with the rest of their life. And what an incredible gift that is. So there needs to be choice, and parents need to be able to access choice in the best interest of their children and their children's future.
Well, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, the brain is changeable. We can change the brain, as you've proved, Barbara, and as you've shown, Mia, and you've seen, Christine. The brain is changeable. But the other thing that we can change is we can change public policy as well. Mm-hmm. And we can, and one of the people that we talked to for the book was the head of a department at a prominent medical school in the United States. And she said the important thing is that kids have the same chances, across the board, whether they come from low, high, or middle income, and they if they have problems, they should have that opportunity to get better. And so I think that's what school choice is all about. And I think it's so important that we change the policy landscape to ensure that every child in America has the same choice and the ability to make those choices that Christine and Mia have, access great programs that are effective for them, like maybe Arrowsmith and others. And only when that change comes about, when we have the real equity that we really want for all kids in our system.
If you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to PRI's podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. And when you're on these platforms, don't forget to give us a big 5 stars. If you don't subscribe to any of these, you can still listen on PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/Pacific Research 1. That's the number 1. Thanks for listening. I'm Rowena Ichon. Hope you'll come back again for next round with PRI.